And thanks for tuning in. This is day 69 in the journey to the Psalms. We are still in Psalm 68 because I got some more stuff I want to bring about. So, man, where do I start? So, in Psalm 68, we see multiple mountains. And if you haven't seen part one, then go see part one because I read through the Psalm. But in Psalm 68, we see multiple mountains, like different names for mountains. And I'm going to see if I can find. So, right here, Mount Bashan, that's one name. And then down here, Sinai, that's another name of a mountain. And another spot, where is it? Mountain of Elohim, or Mountain of God. That's a term that we see throughout the scriptures describing a mountain. Some scriptures will even have some like translations in verse 16 will say mountain something, mountain. I forgot the name of it, but there's a name of a mountain. What I found so interesting is that all these different names for these mountains, it's all talking about the same mountain. So if you saw the video yesterday, I say I don't know what Mount Bashan is. I think it's related to Mount Zion, and I was right. Mount Zion, or no, Mount S- Sin, Sinai. I'm saying this all wrong. This mountain that Moses was on is the same mountain talked about right here, Mount Bashan. This word Bashan, there's a phrase called Basham. It means he came there. He came there. Who came there? God came there. So they call it Mount Bashan. He came there. But what I find so interesting about it is that God's name, there's many different names of God. There's one God, many names. And you got Elohim, Shaddai, Yahweh, Adonai. We can go on and on and on because he has so many different names. This mountain that God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses, it also has many different names. Something else that is so interesting about this mountain, I read on the on Israel's Times News or something. A reporter was talking about it. I read an article about it. That this mountain, it was picked by God because it was the only mountain in the time of Moses that the uh, the other nations did not worship false gods on. That the other nations did not sacrifice idols to a false god on. This was the only mountain, Mount Sinai. There you go, Sinai was the only mountain that was not being used to worship a false god. It was a mountain set apart. And the Hebrew people were a people that were set apart. And God Himself is set apart from sin, set apart for holiness. His people are also set apart for holiness. And this mountain was set apart for holiness. And this is why we see this mountain mentioned time and time and time again. And then later on, there's another mountain that everybody knows about, Mount Zion, and that's a whole nother mountain. That's not Mount Sinai. Mount Zion and Sinai are two different mountains. But when it's talking about the mountain of God, the Mount Bashan, Mount Sinai is referring to the same mountain. Now, if you do a Google search, because that's what I did yesterday, I did a Google search on this mountain, and Mount Bashan. There's a Mount Bashan in Syria, but we know Mount Sinai is, I want to say, what, like southeast of Egypt. So you got the people of the Hebrews. They're going, south towards the Red Sea. They cross the Red Sea. God destroys the people of the army of Egypt at the Red Sea, and then soon after they get to Mount Sinai and receive the Ten Commandments. Well, that Mount Sinai is nowhere near Israel, but for some reason, there's a Mount Bashan in Syria, but Syria is northeast of Israel. I mean, it's a huge difference, but when I was looking at what scholars say and what the Jewish people say about this, is that it's referring to the same mountain. Something else I found interesting is that during the Six-Day War, Israel took control of Mount Bashan for a few years, and there was pilgrimages going on to this mountain in Syria, and so kind of interesting. But from what I found is that it's in Scripture is talking about the same mountain, Mount Zion, Mount Mountain of God, Mountain of Elohim, Mount Bashan. It's all talking about the same mountain, old mountain of many peaks. It's all talking about the same mountain, and I will show you where I got that from. So right here, this is the times of Israel, and it says we are all probably familiar with the names of the site of the greatest mass revelation of God's existence at Mount Zion or Mount Sinai. However, throughout the Bible, that place is variously mentioned under other names. These names include Mountain of God, Mount Bashan, Mount Gavinim. I never heard of that mountain before. And this is what I was talking about. Psalms 68:16. Well, that's where we're at. Psalm 68:16, and it's not mentioned there. This is why it gets interesting when you start looking at the different translations. See, in this scripture, in this translation, it just says, "Oh, many peak mountain is one mountain with many peaks." So that must be the mountain that it's talking about. That Israel Times is mentioning. Mount Hermon, Mount Horeb. It's all mentioning the same mountain, according to the writer of this blog. But yeah, that's what I found out. Yesterday I was like, I gotta look into that. Something else I wanted to point out that I did not point out yesterday, where maybe I did point it out, maybe I just forgot because I'm extremely tired. Um, oh yeah, I didn't point that out. Where is it? Right here in verse 11, it says, Adonai gives the command, a great company proclaims it. In this translation, in the translation I was using, And I was looking at other translations for some reason. When people are translating this verse, they put down a great company of women proclaim it. But when I look at the Hebrew, it doesn't say that. Matter of fact, this word for company is masculine, but they still put down company of women. If there's company of women, then it should be feminine, right? So for some reason, it's being translated a company of women, but I couldn't find anything in the Hebrew scriptures or any kind of resource. I looked at multiple resources. I couldn't find nothing that said that in the Hebrew a company of women. Because the only thing I could find on verse 11 is that this word company, it could mean men, women, children, even angels, a great company. It's very well possible that Adonai gives the command in a great company that's angels, women, children, men, everything. Proclaim it. But then what I think is going on is when they translate that and put women right there, it's because this word, she waits at home, and then her feathers with sheeming gold. So the passage or the paragraph describes women and only women, and so I think that's why they put company of women right there. But but that word was masculine, so I just don't see how that they can put down company of women. And then, look, Adonai gives the command, and a great company proclaims it. Kings and their armies flee in haste. Why? Because Adonai gave the command, and a great company is proclaiming it. And then it says, kings and armies flee in advance, in haste. So there's a war about to happen. And then it says, she waits at home, divides the plunder. Though you lie down among the sheepfolds, the wings of the dove are covered with silver, and her feathers with sheeming gold. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what this passage is saying. What I'm thinking it's saying is that Adonai gives the command that there's a war about to happen, and the ladies at home in the villages and cities of these kings and their armies are at home dividing up their plunder, and they're getting ready to leave to go safety, get their gold, get their silver. That's what I think's going on right here. But I don't know. See, I'm not like these other preachers that sit here and oh, you know what? This is what this means. I don't know what this means. I know this part means that Adonai is going to go war. I know this part means that the kings of the earth are gathering their armies together. But then this is where I get confused at when it starts talking about she and her feathers. So maybe it's a company of women, but then this is masculine. If it's company of women, it would be feminine. So I'll leave that for the more educated scholars to interpret. I'm just gonna be honest, I don't know what that passage means. And I'm gonna say that's day 2 or part 2 of Psalm 68, and tomorrow we will get going with Psalms 69. And remember that patreon.com/growyourfaith, and and you'll get access to this Bible version before anyone else. Have a great week of worship.